Gotta go.
Hey, guy, you're the first serious gamer I've seen all morning. Check this out. Brand new 16-bit Super Nintendo with Super Mario World. Wait, kid, that game
I'll
there.
take Sonic and Genesis.
I knew that.
Perhaps the most defining characteristic of a game console is its game library. Each system of the 16-bit era had unique first-party and third-party offerings that made each system special to the player. To set the stage in North America, the Super Nintendo library ran around 720 cartridges, while the Sega Genesis would run around 730, so roughly the same amount of games released for each system. NEC's TurboGrafx had a much smaller HuCard library in the United States, running around 94 titles, but when you add in its CD catalog, you add roughly 50 more titles to the North American console. But if you add on its international library, it becomes exponentially larger. Sega's CD add-on added roughly 145 more titles to the Genesis ecosystem, while the 32X would add around 40 niche cartridges. The Neo Geo AES home library is compact but mighty, having roughly 140 to 150 North American home releases. The actual numbers will vary a bit source by source, but they show the big picture. The Super Nintendo and the Genesis dominated in sheer variety, while the TurboGrafx and Neo Geo offered smaller, more focused libraries, with Sega's add-ons temporarily expanding the Genesis's footprint. The Sega Genesis library is one of the most diverse and influential of the 16-bit era, boasting around 730 cartridge releases in North America. Sega built its brand on fast-paced arcade-style action, and nowhere is that more evident than with Sonic the Hedgehog and its sequels, which quickly became the face of the system. But the library goes far beyond Sonic. The Genesis is home to some of the best beat-em-ups of the era, like Streets of Rage 2 and Golden Axe, delivering a level of energy and attitude that defines Sega's identity. Sports fans would also find a home here as well, thanks to the Madden NFL series, NHL 94, and NBA Jam, which gave the console a broad mainstream appeal. The Genesis carved out a strong niche in shoot-em-ups, with titles like Thunder Force 4 and Musha, pushing the hardware to its limits. While role-playing fans retreated to deep experiences in Phantasy Star 4 and Shining Force 2. What stands out about the Genesis is its commitment to arcade authenticity. Sega's close ties to the arcades meant players could bring home experiences like Altered Beast, Ghouls and Ghosts, and Outrun, all of which played remarkably well on the hardware. Even licensed games took on a different personality on Genesis. Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse proved early on that Sega could deliver animation, speed, and charm without sacrificing challenge. And when Aladdin arrived, the Genesis version stood apart. Hand-animated by Disney animators themselves, faster and more aggressive than its Super Nintendo counterpart, it wasn't just a tie-in, it was a showcase on the Genesis. Comic Zone was something entirely different. It was a game that didn't just look like a comic book, it would play like one. Panels shattered, enemies burst through the page, and the story literally unfolded around you. It was risky, experimental, and unmistakably a Sega title. Contra Hard Corps doubled down on everything the series was known for: speed, difficulty, and pure chaos, with multiple playable characters, branching paths, and bosses that felt like they were ripped straight from the arcade. Earthworm Jim followed a different path for most video games of the time, offering absurd humor, surreal animation, and gameplay that constantly shifted expectations. It was weird, loud, and unforgettable, and the Genesis version is what I associate most with this franchise. However, not every Genesis game was about speed. Toe Jam and Earl slowed things down with its funky, procedural, and unapologetically strange title. It wasn't trying to be Mario, it wasn't trying to be Sonic, but it was its own thing. Castlevania Bloodlines brought Konami's Gothic classic to Sega, faster, harder, and more aggressive than before. Where Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles The Hyperstone Heist delivered arcade-quality brawling with speed and attitude that felt right at home on the Genesis. Another classic franchise that I associate heavily with Genesis is Road Rash. Speed, danger, and combat on two wheels, it was backed by a soundtrack that felt like it belonged in a garage, not in a living room. It was messy, it was loud, and it was purely something Genesis. Road Rash would be a perfect capstone for Sega's edgier image. Of course, the Genesis library wasn't perfect. The sound chip was a matter of taste. While some would love its gritty FM synth, others found it harsh compared to the richer sound of the Super Nintendo. And while RPG fans had some gems to enjoy, the overall lineup in that genre couldn't match with Nintendo's powerhouse releases. Still, the Genesis offered a bold, edgy library filled with action, sports, and arcade excitement, making it one of the defining game catalogs of the 16-bit generation. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System is often remembered for its depth, polish, and sheer variety. With roughly 717 cartridges released in North America, the Super Nintendo became a haven for both action-packed adventures and richly crafted role-playing games. Its library is defined by iconic franchises that set new standards in gaming. Super Mario World and Donkey Kong Country dazzled players with tight controls, imaginative level design, and groundbreaking graphics for the first time. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past delivered one of the most memorable top-down adventure experiences, blending exploration, puzzles, and combat all seamlessly. Role-playing games were a particular strength, with Final Fantasy III, Chrono Trigger, and Earthbound offering some of the deepest, most memorable stories and gameplay of the era. Platformers like Super Castlevania IV and Mega Man X showcased the system's technical abilities while providing challenging gameplay. Nintendo also excelled at creating unique, quirky experiences with titles like Yoshi's Island, Kirby Superstar, and Pilot Wings, each standing out for creativity and charm. Super Mario RPG showed just how flexible Nintendo's mascot could be. This game was a mind-blowing crossover that I don't think anyone saw coming at the time. A full role-playing game, turn-based, story-driven, and packed with charm, and developed in collaboration with Square. This game has truly become a classic on the platform. Super Mario All-Stars would go in a different direction, offering the classic NES games rebuilt from the ground up, with refined visuals, improved sound, and quality-of-life improvements that made the old favorites feel new again. These games highlight Nintendo's focus on longevity, refinement, and genre expansion, not just sequels. Street Fighter II Turbo wasn't just popular at the time, it became the standard for fighting games, with precise controls, faithful arcade presentation, and competitive depth that defined fighting games for decades to come. Contra 3: The Alien Wars pushed the hardware hard, rotating battlefields, massive bosses, and relentless action that showed how far the Super Nintendo could be pushed. These games would reinforce the Super Nintendo as the console known for faithful arcade conversions and technical polish. F-Zero launched with the system and would introduce speed in a different way. Clean, controlled, and built around the Mode 7 scaling that made futuristic tracks feel alive, it wasn't just chaotic, it was calculated. This game would offer a direct contrast to Genesis speed with precision over aggression. Super Punch-Out would demand timing, observation, and mastery. Every opponent was a puzzle to learn their patterns, exploit their tells, and earn every victory. Super Star Wars would bring a cinematic scope to the console, with large sprites, multi-layered stages, and orchestral-style music, as well as some of the most difficult platforming games I have ever played. Star Fox would go even further, offering real-time 3D polygons powered by the Super FX chip. And while viewed as more harshly today, this game was more known for giving a glimpse at the future of console gaming, rather than what the gaming experience had to offer. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4: Turtles in Time is often considered the definitive beat-em-up of the era, with tight controls, colorful visuals, and cooperative chaos perfected. And for me, almost nothing beats flinging enemies at the screen and having them smack into it. A clean counterpart to the Hyperstone heist, reinforcing the Super Nintendo's polish versus Genesis's speed. The Super Nintendo library balanced accessibility and complexity, offering something for everyone, from casual gamers to hardcore enthusiasts. Its strength lay not only in individual titles, but in the consistency of quality and the ability to foster iconic franchises that would define generations to come. The Neo Geo AES was a premium system, offering arcade-perfect experiences at home, and its library reflected that dedication. While there were only around 118 games released in North America, each title was a showcase of the system's technical prowess and arcade heritage. Fighting games dominated the catalog, with legendary franchises like The King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, and Fatal Fury setting new standards for competitive gameplay. The system's large cartridges and impressive hardware allowed detailed sprites, smooth animations, and expansive movesets that were unmatched on other 16-bit consoles. Beyond the fighting games, the AES offered high-quality shooters, beat-em-ups, and sports titles, including games like Magician Lord, Neo Turf Masters, and Top Hunter. Despite the smaller library, the consistency of quality was remarkable. Almost every game was a fully polished, arcade-grade experience. This focus on excellence over quality made the AES a collector's dream and a unique platform in the 16-bit era. While its high price and limited market presence limited its adoption, the system's library remains legendary for enthusiasts and competitive gamers alike. The TurboGrafx-16, along with its upgraded Turbo Duo, offered a unique and colorful library that stood apart from other 16-bit systems. With the limited number of games released for the TurboGrafx-16 in North America, the system excelled at fast-paced shooters, platformers, and quirky Japanese imports that rarely made it to other consoles. Titles like Bonk's Adventure, Blazing Lasers, and Military Madness showcased the system's distinctive style, blending vibrant graphics with responsive gameplay. The Turbo Duo further expanded the system's capabilities with CD-based releases, adding enhanced audio and larger game worlds. While the library is smaller than that of the Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis, it was often experimental and visually striking, with many games offering mechanics and designs not seen elsewhere. The system appealed to players looking for something different, particularly those who enjoyed shooters, RPGs, and Japanese exclusive content that pushed hardware creatively. With the system using the unique but limited HuCard format, as well as the expansive CD format, this system truly gained a cult following throughout its time, and even more so since the console has faded from relevance. Though the console had its limitations, whenever I see a game that pushes the system to its limit, it is truly something to behold. Games like Ys Book 1 and 2, Dungeon Explorer, and Newtopia 2 were titles that had expansive worlds, but perhaps one of the most impressive HuCard titles for me is the game Magical Quest, though its rarity and extremely high price will be off-putting for many. Overall, I was impressed by the number of titles I did find to play on this system, and most of them can truly only be experienced on this console. When comparing each system's library to one another, the Sega Genesis boasts a vast and diverse library, blending fast-paced action, beat-em-ups, sports, and arcade ports. Key strengths were their aggressive marketing, third-party support, and a library that appealed to older kids and teens. Iconic titles like Sonic the Hedgehog, Streets of Rage 2, Shining Force 2, and Gunstar Heroes showcase the system's technical strengths and versatility. With a large number of games released in the US, the Genesis offered quantity, variety, and accessibility. The Super Nintendo's library was defined by quality and polish. With a similar amount of releases to the Sega Genesis, it excelled in RPGs, platformers, and action-adventure games. Standout titles like Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy III, and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past represented some of the finest games of the era. Though offering a similar number of titles as the Genesis, Nintendo's first-party franchises made the Super Nintendo a powerhouse in gaming. The TurboGrafx and Turbo Duo had a smaller, more niche library. Some of the strengths of the TurboGrafx 16 were the shooters, Japanese imports, and titles like Bonk's Adventure, Blazing Lasers, and CD-enhanced RPGs such as Ys Book 1 and 2. While it lacked the broad appeal and quantity of games of the Genesis or Super Nintendo, the TurboGrafx offered unique experiences that could really not be found anywhere else at the time, particularly in CD-based games. The Neo Geo AES library is also comparably small to the TurboGrafx, but its library is made up with consistently arcade-quality games. Its focus on fighting games such as The King of Fighters and Samurai Showdown meant that almost every release was polished and competitive. However, high price points and a lack of general diverse games limited its overall appeal compared to other systems. When it comes to which game system of this era had the best games library, here is how viewers voted. For me personally, I believe the Super Nintendo takes the crown for overall game library, due to its combination of high-quality titles, genre variety, and enduring franchises. Its library consistently delivered both innovative experiences and polished gameplay across multiple genres, cementing its place as a cultural and gaming milestone. The Genesis earns the runner-up status for me for its breadth and accessibility. With a strong focus on action, sports, and arcade-style games, it offered something for nearly every player. Its aggressive third-party support and marketing helped it challenge Nintendo and leave a lasting legacy. By 1994, the battle for 16-bit supremacy was at its peak, with Sega and Nintendo locked in a fierce rivalry that defined the generation. Sega had carved out significant ground with its edgy marketing and the lightning-fast exploits of Sonic the Hedgehog. The company targeted teens and young adults with bold slogans like "Genesis does what Nintendo don't," positioning itself as the cooler alternative. However, by 1994, Nintendo's retaliation was in full swing. By the end of 1993, Nintendo released Star Fox, with its marketing heavily advertising the new Super FX chip, allowing for full 3D graphics to be shown on their system, and they were happy to tell you that you would not be able to play this on Sega's system. Going into '94, Sega was internally debating on how they would be able to get another year out of their aging hardware, due to the fact that consoles like the Atari Jaguar and the 3DO were showcasing technological superiority, which is what Sega was claiming to have with their CD add-on. With their next-gen system over a year away, it was decided that another hardware add-on would be developed in order to give the system new 32-bit capabilities. The new peripheral was teased over the summer of 1994, but Nintendo would be stealing those eyes away by introducing a new type of game for their system. I have long since forgotten the circumstances that led to my possession of it, but a VHS tape arrived in our collection that showcased a brand new game for Nintendo called Donkey Kong Country.
It's like, whoa, and it blows your mind.
It's all the shading and stuff. It's really well shaded. Everything looks so rounded.
And you're really going to think that it's a game that's a generation ahead of its time.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Last second timing stuff in there where you have to jump real quick.
I think a lot of people are going to be surprised at the kind of game that Donkey Kong Country is.
Nintendo was advertising the heck out of this game as a 16-bit game with next-gen graphics. It may not look like it when viewed in the present, but back in the day, seeing these graphics running on a Super Nintendo was mind-boggling to me. And seeing this VHS tape saying that they were using the latest graphics hardware that was used to create things like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2, I was left dumbfounded that this was running, seemingly natively, on a Super Nintendo. Of course, they left out the part about all of these graphics being pre-rendered and then captured to be put onto their system, but even still, the results are very impressive. And what stood out to me the most about this is that there was no Super FX chip in the system and no extra peripheral needed to run this game. Donkey Kong Country itself helped dispel the myth that the Super Nintendo was technologically inferior to the Genesis, proving to kids that with creativity and some smart design, Nintendo could still push the boundaries of what seemed possible on these systems. This would, at least in my mind, keep me from even considering getting a 32X. However, the release of Donkey Kong Country was not the only thing going against the 32X. It had several other critical issues. One being that it arrived too late into the Genesis lifecycle. Just as gamers and developers were shifting focus to true next-gen consoles, this add-on would fragment the market, confusing customers who now face multiple hardware choices with the Genesis console, the Sega CD, the 32X, and rumors of the entirely new console coming out the following year. Additionally, at launch, the 32X's game library was limited and lacked compelling titles, failing to attract enough developers or gamers to justify its purchase. Within the company, tensions between Sega of America and Sega of Japan created strategic missteps with inconsistent messaging and a lack of unified vision. Ultimately, the 32X became a commercial failure, tarnishing Sega's reputation and undermining consumer confidence, creating a turning point that foreshadowed the company's struggles in the upcoming console generation. Whereas with Donkey Kong Country, it was met with huge critical and commercial success, and kept the Super Nintendo relevant for at least another year, keeping Nintendo's momentum going even after Sega and newcomer Sony would release their new systems. While Nintendo would continue to offer strong games in 1995, including the sequel to Donkey Kong Country, a long-awaited sequel to Super Mario World that, at least in my opinion, let down expectations, one of my favorite RPGs of all time, and an unexpected collaboration between Square and Nintendo creating an RPG out of the Mario franchise, and other late-era hits. However, Sega's momentum slowed down significantly. Even though there were some stellar games released in 1995 for the Genesis, most people had shifted their focus to what would be the next generation. Still, an effort was made to make games on the Genesis like Nintendo was making with their system by using pre-rendered graphics, with their initial response to Donkey Kong Country being the game Vector Man. And while I do enjoy this game very much and did play it back in the day, I have to admit that it does lack the broad appeal that Donkey Kong Country had at that time. And the game can get insanely difficult as you get towards the later part of it. But overall, the year 1994 would see a flip-flop in the industry. Where Sega was constantly challenging Nintendo, leading in the 16-bit war, it was at this point in gaming history where Nintendo would emerge as the triumphant leader, continually outselling the aging Sega Genesis. In fact, in 1995, the Super Nintendo would even outsell Sega's next system, the Saturn. And while all this history is well and good, which system do I believe won the 16-bit war? When answering this question, some would point to sales charts, others to raw power, sound chips, or the size of each library. But looking back, the real winners of the 16-bit war for me weren't the companies battling for market share. The real winner of the 16-bit war were us, the gamers. We got to live through one of the most creative, competitive, and innovative eras in gaming history. An era where every console pushed the others to be better. An era that gave us adventures, characters, and memories that still matter decades later. If it's one thing the 16-bit war proved, it's that greatness isn't defined by a single system, but by the experiences that stay with us long after we put down the controller. The experiences that were made during this generation have endured well beyond their original hardware, as these games are often re-released on modern systems and have been re-released throughout the years, starting with compilation titles and gaining further relevance as many people experience these titles for the first time when the Nintendo Wii started including a virtual console shop selling retro titles. But we have all experienced the 16-bit era in our own way, so tell me, which console, which game, or which moment has meant the most to you? Go ahead and share some of your memories down below. I really look forward to seeing what your experience has been with the 16-bit war. The Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Once kings of the market, were now aging hardware competing against powerful new systems like the Sony PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. Both consoles saw a decline in first-party support as developers and gamers turned their attention to the fresh possibilities of 3D graphics and CD-quality audio. While the Super Nintendo continued to enjoy a loyal fan base with late releases such as Earthbound and Donkey Kong Country 3, and the Genesis saw strong sales with titles like Vector Man 2 and Mortal Kombat 3, the writing was on the wall. The arrival of new technology rendered the 16-bit systems technologically obsolete, leading to a natural wind-down in production and retail prominence. Yet, their influence lingered. The gameplay, franchises, and innovations from the Genesis and Super Nintendo era would continue to shape gaming for decades to come. As the 90s progressed and a new generation of consoles firmly took hold, the Genesis and Super Nintendo began their final chapter. Sega would license their Genesis to Majesco to release the Genesis 3, which was a compact, cost-reduced version aimed at the budget-conscious consumer and nostalgic gamers. Despite its lower price tag and smaller size, the Genesis 3 lacked many of the features of the original, and Sega's focus had clearly shifted to newer hardware. Nintendo would also reduce their hardware to a budget-conscious consumer, known as the SNES Junior. This redesigned, sleeker version of the Super Nintendo was smaller and more modern in appearance, making it a popular choice for late adopters and collectors. Throughout the late 90s, both consoles saw dwindling support as their once vast libraries transitioned to legacy status. Production slowly tapered off, and new releases became rare as game developers focused on the next-gen systems, as well as an emerging PC gaming market. By the dawn of the new millennium, the Genesis and Super Nintendo had quietly faded from the mainstream retail, but had left an indelible mark on gaming history, with their influence still being felt in countless franchises, gameplay mechanics, and in the hearts of fans worldwide. Though they had faded from store shelves by the early 2000s, their legacy was far from over. With the rise of emulation in the late 90s and early 2000s, a new generation of gamers discovered these classic systems through software that faithfully recreated the original hardware experience on PCs and other devices. Nintendo would embrace this nostalgia with the launch of the Virtual Console service on the Wii, bringing Super Nintendo and Genesis games to a new audience via digital download. This would also expand into the Neo Geo and TurboGrafx as well as some of their 8-bit systems. The interest in the new retro gaming market seemed to reach its peak with the release of standalone mini-consoles. As with Atari, Intellivision, and ColecoVision before them, Sega would also release several variations of mini-systems, but the market was somewhat legitimized with the Super Nintendo Classic Edition in 2017 and the Genesis Mini releasing in 2019, both offering meticulously curated libraries, modern HDMI connectivity, and faithful recreations of the original hardware's feel. These efforts have ensured that the magic of the 16-bit era continues to thrive, preserving these consoles and their games as enduring treasures for longtime fans and newcomers alike. The 16-bit console war would be more than just a battle for market dominance. It was a defining moment that shaped the future of video gaming. The fierce competition pushed innovations in graphics, sound, and gameplay, setting new standards for what games on home consoles could achieve. The rivalry between Sega and Nintendo fueled marketing creativity, brand identity, and fan loyalty that transformed gaming into a cultural phenomenon. There were so many iconic franchises born or refined during this era, from Sonic the Hedgehog and Donkey Kong Country to Castlevania and Metal Slug. The lessons learned in hardware innovation, third-party relationships, and audience targeting guided the strategies of future console makers and shaped the evolution towards 3D gaming and online play. Above all, the 16-bit war helped establish gaming as a mainstream entertainment medium, bridging generations and inspiring millions around the world to pick up a controller and explore new worlds. The 16-bit console war was more than just a fight between machines, it was a battle that shaped the course of gaming history forever. From groundbreaking technology to unforgettable games and unforgettable rivalries, this era laid the foundation for everything that followed. And so the 16-bit war comes to a close, an era defined by color, creativity, and the last great age of pure pixel art. But as the dust settled, a new battle was already on the horizon. The industry was about to leave sprites behind and charge headfirst into a bold, uncharted frontier, the world of 3D graphics. And while all eyes were on what Sega and Nintendo would offer in this next generation, there would be unexpected competition with the explosive growth of Windows 95 and Windows 98 PC gaming, and a brand new competitor would ignite a new conflict unlike anything before it.
Sony Computer Entertainment President of America, Steve Reyes, join me for a brief presentation. $299.
If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you like what you see, please remember to leave a like and click that subscribe button on your way out. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.